And now we move on to our last panel discussion for the day. It's been 3 long days, but it's been, in my view, and your feedback has been aligned with that, 3 very interesting days. The last panel of Interact, and to close our discussions on the Digital New Deal, I'm delighted to welcome Tina Lakhani, the head of AdTech at IAB UK, who will moderate a panel of industry standards experts to ascertain the views on future developments and standards and what we need to do as an industry to get there, to make progress, to launch these. They will detail the importance of partnerships in successfully launching and supporting standards and sharing best practice, and how their organization rolls out and upholds such standards. So, Tina, good afternoon, welcome, and over to you.
Great. Thank you so much, Constantine. Good afternoon, everyone. And thank you all so much for joining. And thank you to IAB Europe for hosting what's been a fantastic 3 days of events. As Constantine mentioned, I'm Tina Lakhani. I'm head of AdTech at IAB UK. And I'm really excited to be rounding up kind of these days of events with an awesome lineup of panelists talking about standards and frameworks in our industry. What I really love about this panel already, and just knowing those of you that are on it, is that we all come from such different parts of the industry. And so I'm just excited that there is such a broad range of knowledge to be shared. So before we go into it, maybe I'll just take a moment to just allow you all to introduce yourselves. David, maybe if I come to you first, David Goddard.
Thank you for specifying. It's confusing enough as it is having 2 Davids on the panel. Yes, hello everyone, my name is David Goddard. I'm Senior Director of Business Development at DoubleVerify, responsible for expanding partnerships with media technology providers in the ecosystem. And I also have the pleasure of chairing IAB Europe's Programmatic Trading Committee.
Great, thank you. Dave, maybe we come to you next.
Yeah, hi everyone. So I work at Samsung. I'm European Head of Product for our CTVs and mobiles, both from an ads perspective and data perspective. So that's 17 markets in Europe and Russia, so 18 countries. And I attempt to lead our propositions in market to our agency and advertiser customers.
Great, thanks. Jules, maybe if we come to you next.
Hi everyone, I'm Jules Kendrick. I work for the Trustworthy Accountability Group. I'm MD for UK and Europe. I hope that most of the audience knows who we are, but if you don't, we're the cross-industry, not-for-profit, self-regulatory body that was set up by our industry's top trade bodies to tackle criminal activity and promote brand safety through compliance to standards. And that's both for sell-side and buy-side companies right across the digital advertising supply chain.
Great, we could not be more relevant to this panel in that case. And last but not least, Yale, if we come to you last.
Hi everyone, Yale Cohen, EVP of Global Digital Standards for Publicis Media, and also the chair for the 4A's APB.
Great, thank you so much, everyone. I guess maybe just getting straight into it, we obviously just had a great session from Shaylee at IAB Tech Lab talking about why standards are important. And also me, from an IAB point of view, I live and breathe standards every day as part of my job. And I really see the value and importance of them. But I guess just maybe hear from you guys, from your point of view, especially those of you in practitioner positions, to just talk about looking at kind of the industry and your roles over the last 1 or 2 years. Which industry standards do you think have been the most impactful on your business? Dave, obviously you come from the publisher point of view, so maybe we go to you first.
No worries. Okay, I guess there's a number of areas I could go, but trying to stay focused and try and choose one key area that's impacted our business, it would probably have to be around consent management frameworks and platforms. Primarily starting out in Samsung Ads as a smart TV offering, and now we're going live with mobile across Europe as well. We've very much had to double down on our efforts to simplify and standardize the consent management platforms that we offer to our customers. Quite aptly, this week was the 3rd year anniversary of GDPR, so I'm sure we all had various celebratory parties with our friends and family to mark that occasion and the impact it's had on all our lives, or maybe not. But really what GDPR did is shone the spotlight on consent transparency, how different types of data are collected from customers, human beings, consumers ultimately, who are engaging with Samsung's products or any publisher's products, and making sure that we're clear as publishers about what types of data we want to use and for what purposes, and to the other vendors we're going to pass that data to and for what purposes. And so in good faith, publishers created their own consent management platforms, and we soon found that we needed standardization. We need to simplify the user experience or the customer experience. And that's where the IAB came in, and we fully back the IAB, their Transparency Consent Frameworks version 1, 1.1, and now version 2. And this year has been very much about implementing the IAB Transparency Consent Framework version 2 across our millions of mobile devices across Europe. We think it's the best in class transparency consent framework there is and consent management platform, and also across our CTVs. So we know the adoption of the IAB Transparency Consent Framework and ultimately the pop-up you get on a website, on a mobile app, has been very well adopted in web, also in mobile, but CTV is very much lacking or is in third place there. So we have very much focused on this as an area. So by the end of this year, our mobile devices and CTVs across Europe will be showing consent management platforms that adhere to the IAB Transparency Consent Framework version 2. So that is a big piece of work, and therefore you can see why that's been a big impact for our business.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think just the topic of privacy and ID and consent has just been something that we've not really stopped talking about since the launch of GDPR, and then most especially with kind of announcements from the recent tech platforms in the last 2 years. It's all that we're talking about. Jules, maybe if I come to you next to get your point of view. Obviously, you work across a broad range of standards as well. For you, what do you think has been the most impactful?
I was going to say, first of all, I think I missed that GDPR party, Dave. I'm gutted. I get it. A real rager.
There'll be one next year. Don't worry.
Make sure I'm invited. So, yeah, I mean, I think from TAG's perspective, really, over the last year, we've seen continued growth in the uptake of both the brand safety and the fraud standards, not least, obviously, with the merger of TAG and JITWebs in September of last year. And that really enabled the industry to have access to truly global standards, which was an ask that we'd been hearing from the market for some time. So now really we have 600 companies in the TAG community and close to 250 companies achieving over 300 TAG seals. That's pretty impressive when you look at that's right across the digital supply chain. And also at the start of this year, 2021, when all of TAG companies go through their annual certification process, we actually saw that 40% of those companies were achieving global certification, which was up from 32% last year. So we're really seeing that adoption and participation, not just in the markets where those standards really started in the US and the UK, but really across many more markets. And also, we're also seeing through TAG's annual fraud research, where we compare invalid traffic rates in TAG certified channels against industry norms. We're still seeing a real reduction there. So we basically look at just over 40 billion ad impressions across the UK, Germany, France, Italy, and the Netherlands. And we see a dramatic reduction in fraud rates across the European markets to just 0.53% when using TAG certified channels, as opposed to kind of those industry norms in Europe of just over 9%. So we're really seeing that adoption and participation continue to grow, and actually that we're looking at that it actually makes an impact. It actually starts to solve some of the challenges we're addressing. I'm very confident and that we're going to continue to grow in that way.
I think the topic of fraud, and I'm lucky enough to get to join some of the TAG meetings, but I know that fraud, especially during the pandemic and while more and more people were coming online, it just became such an increasing issue. So yeah, definitely a really good one to call out.
Yeah, also, sorry, just to say that exactly as you mentioned, in the pandemic, where we see a lot of businesses were having to face a lot of other challenges and a lot of struggles, that we didn't see any drop off, that we said that fraud and brand safety was still paramount to those businesses to make sure that they were achieving that standard. So that was really, really encouraging to see.
Actually, I guess that's, yeah, I'd be transitions nicely onto Yale, actually, from obviously the agency point of view and working directly with brands. Like Yale, what would you say has been the most impactful standards that you've seen over the last year or so?
So I think it was actually 2019, we helped to take our TAG certification globally and did it across all 4 of your different certifications. So we were one of the few, if not the only holding company that did a platinum status certification. So I think we started to to lean in on a lot of those different standards for brand safety, ad fraud, malware, piracy very early on. And where we started to lean in and focus our efforts the past year or so was how do we move from brand safety to brand suitability, and now to this concept that's more around brand integrity, which focuses around how do we build that trust and purpose back with the consumer and to meet their expectations. I think what Dave was saying around consent, we start to see that the consumer is starting to become more aware of these things, and they have a voice. And we've seen about 60% of consumers, not just in the US, but globally, in every single market, have started to vote with their pocketbook based on their belief system. And that's why this concept of brand integrity is extremely important. And we're trying to build out this framework so that brands can embrace it, embrace how culture meets with a brand's values, and how they start to understand the decisions that they make, not just for the short term, but for the long term, really impact how they're perceived by the consumer. So it's really about the environments that our brands are showing up in. And then that helps us to reinform also our brand safety and our brand suitability and all of the other standards that we work on as a touch point to the consumer. Because ultimately we need to be thinking about that entire consumer journey, and the consumer is becoming even more empowered in these things. And in terms of their ability to make critical decisions or shift their loyalty. And so it's become extremely important for us to mitigate fraud, for us to mitigate piracy, for us to have more informed consent. So all these things, like they started to dovetail very nicely with where Publicis is going towards this concept of brand integrity.
Definitely, I just feel like the consumer and culture shift over the last year especially has just been phenomenal, and you really start to hear advertisers talking more and more about kind of ethics within their advertising, which I think is just such an interesting subject. I'm sure we'll have time to come on to that a bit more later. But David, last but not least, maybe if I come on to you to get your views on standards that have been the most impactful.
Yeah, I can't disagree with everything everyone's said so far, but I want to go a different route. And I think the standard I was most excited about is open measurement for web, not just for DoubleVerify, but for the whole industry. Because it wasn't too long ago that independent viewability measurement presented a complex challenge for mobile advertisers. In order to solve this, IB Tech Lab developed a solution for open measurement, which was mentioned in the previous presentation, which eliminated the need for multiple vendor integrations, facilitated third-party viewability and verification measurement for ads served into mobile app environments. Now, in December 2020, Open Measurement Working Group developed Open Measurement Video SDK to standardize the way open measurement signals are collected in web video advertising, allowing for a single standard across web and a mobile app that is trusted, transparent, and secure. As a member of the Open Measurement Commit Group in the larger Open Measurement Working Group, DoubleVerify continues to advocate this, as I'm doing now, working to streamline, automate processes that make integration simple and convenient for demand and supply partners alike. But the important thing is, adoption of open measurement reduces measurement inconsistencies, making it easier for advertisers to get consistent media quality signals across environments. We hope the release of Open Measurement SDK for web, and the really exciting bit, the open measurement for CTV, and we'll talk about that another time, in addition to recent VAS solution called video filtering that DoubleVerify pioneered, will help buyers move away from VPaid and enable publishers to capture buys that previously required VPaid. I think that's really important.
I think that's it. Yeah, it's actually transitions really nicely to the next topic I wanted to talk about, because obviously the OM SDK for like web has been around for so many years, and now we have the OM SDK for web. And I guess one of the things that with standards is that the need for them, or like in what areas we actually need them, is something that we have learned and continue to learn like over time and as time develops. But like looking at new and emerging channels, like more and more around us is becoming digitally enabled. And so maybe just a question around how do we take some of the learnings that we've got from more traditional channels like display, like web, for example, and how do we bring those over to environments like CTV or audio or influencer or kind of these newer channels? And I guess maybe to ask the question of which standards do you think are the most important for new and emerging channels, given now X number of years on in web? What learnings can we apply to those newer channels? What advice would we give? David, you were talking a little bit about the OMSDK for CTV, so I will come to you first on that one.
Thank you very much. DV's focus for a while has been on the expansion of our capabilities in CTV, enabling our clients to authenticate media quality and protect brand equity in this exciting new channel. But it's, again, like, what standards we bring over? It's not about reinventing the wheel. We don't have to. For example, my first piece of advice to publishers is to support VAS2 and above. That's been around since 2012 and accepted by the majority of video environments, and will be the first step of unlocking both transparency and therefore scaling revenue in CTV. I would suggest advertisers make use and publishers begin to accept third-party measurement in CTV space. This will help debunk those myths such as all CTV is fraud-free, viewable and brand safe, which it isn't, unfortunately. And it can start with collaboration between stakeholders working with verification companies like DoubleVerify. It will help the industry combat, as Jules highlighted, the high growing levels of fraud in this space. For example, like Jules said, we didn't see it slow down either. In 2020, we saw over 500,000 fraudulent device signatures detected daily in CTV, and we saw CTV fraud impressions increase 220% from 2020 from 2019. So it's also good to mention that fraudsters are becoming far more sophisticated, something DV's fraud team noticed with the uncovering Octobot fraud scheme, which was a family of fraud schemes we found were related rather than individual fraud schemes. As I mentioned, brand safety still is an issue in CTV. We've seen ads running adult content, porn apps, for example, pet sitter and screensaver apps, which are all deemed either red flags and a waste of money. So encouraging the support of third-party verification to be run in all VAS-supported environments, we're solving for this challenge. However, we do need to ensure that we as an industry work together to continue to improve inconsistent standards, technology, app and content transparency. And by addressing these challenges, advertisers will be able to protect brand equity, minimize waste, and measure performance in CTV. And trust and transparency is key to unlocking investment in CTV and increasing investment in premium publishers like Samsung, for example.
I'm actually not sure that it's the industry standards that are lacking for some of the emerging channels. I really think that some of the standards around, like just passing around content ID and how the ads are stitched together, I think it's a challenge of some of the publishers sharing some of the data, or their forthcomingness to share the data back with either measurement partners or delivery partners like Samsung to identify the difference between the content, the ad experience, for us to really help our advertisers identify, is this a fraudulent impression, or is it human? Is it someone in front of their screen? Is it the right contextual environment for our advertisers? So there are amazing standards out there already that just need to be adopted more. And I think there just needs to be a more education or a different potential commercial structure to allow for some of these things, or just a different change in our terms and conditions to have a better understanding and workflow between the publisher, the advertiser, the delivery, the measurement companies as well. So I think there's been so much work done, especially in CTV. I think audio is still working to figure it out. I think they're trying to adopt more legacy movie type ratings and figure out how to do that. But then again, I think there's still in some instances with some of these new formats and channels, it's a more program manual where it's pre-matching inventory with audiences. And so you're not seeing some of the real-time signals that allow DV and measurement partners to understand more about the ad impression and the metrics associated with it. I don't know if you, David or Dave or Jules, what are your thoughts?
I'd love to come back on that. I totally agree. There are industry standards available, like Content ID or the content object in the OpenRTB spec, where this information can be passed. Some challenges we face there are around restrictions due to kind of privacy restrictions, especially in the US with VPPA, Video Privacy Protection Act, or you have breakage issues with macros. So if you're passing that kind of content level data, you've got URL string limitations, which could impede the passing of that metadata through macros, for example. But I do agree with you. It's like that collaboration piece, which I think we're going to hit the drum on. Verification partners, advertisers, publishers, industry bodies, all working together to say, okay, what is a safe and secure way to pass this information? What will work? What's consistent? So we can get that kind of content level transparency to tackle some of the things, brand suitability issues that are really challenging in video only environments such as CTV. I do think we need to see more publishers passing app information, so app bundles alone, because it's amazing how many impressions aren't passing app bundles and how many app bundles don't follow kind of IAB standards as well. So it's just alphanumeric jargon and it doesn't relate to any other things. So there are some other things we can definitely clean up on, Yale. I agree. There are standards available now that can be utilized. We just need to educate and collaborate to enable those things.
We've got someone in the audience agreeing, that kind of saying that the standards are out there. Or I guess essentially the agreements are out there. They only become a standard once a certain level of adoption is achieved. So yeah, it's a good point. Like the work is done. It's just a case of continuing to educate and communicate them to get their adoption.
Yeah, I was just going to
I'll pause there for yeah, go on.
Sorry, Jean. I was just going to jump in on that. Yeah, it's always about collaboration, adoption, participation. I think when you look at the fraud standard, for example, and we know in CTV that fraud is an issue, and the fraud standard, the tag fraud standard, the tag brand safety standard are for all areas of digital, so they're applicable whether it's web, mobile, CTV, audio, but it's about participation in those, and that enables us to continue to raise the standard. And again, the fraud research that I mentioned earlier for Europe, but we obviously do that in the US, and last year it was the first time that we actually included analysis of fraud across CTV. And again, it found that when you're using tag certified channels, again, it offers similar strong protections as it does on web and mobile against fraud, again, with only sort of 0.6% IVT in that channel. So again, it is, with any standard, it is about adoption and participation. And then also that then enables us to keep looking at what else we need to do. How do we raise the bar to reduce that fraud even further?
Yeah, for sure. I would say as well, I definitely think industry has a role to play in that as well, in terms of the education and communication and driving the adoption, because one of the things is around like how complicated some of these standards are, and when you try to explain too much of the nitty-gritty of like how a standard is working, then actually you lose some of the people who are not actually engaged. So I think we need to focus more on actually what is, instead of focusing on what the standard is and what it does, like what is the issue that it's solving, and trying to help advertisers know that this is the problem that you identify with and you understand. And this is the solution that's out there to exist that does it. Yeah, that's definitely a large part of what we do at IAB UK. Like, for example, with our gold standard, like trying to make it just really easy for advertisers to understand this is the problem, this is the solution, and these are the companies that are doing it.
I think that's a really good point, because education is key. And I think we're talking about, obviously, we're a global industry, and not all markets are as advanced as others. Not everyone, you might look at the top 5 markets and may well have a great understanding, but you've got new entrants into the market, you've got smaller markets who perhaps haven't had that experience. So yeah, I think often that kind of education and getting the messaging so it's not confusing is really important.
Just to build on that as well, the other C word of the day for me is customer. So I think this panel's, and the spirit of these 3 days, is very much about collaboration. And if people are looking for a feisty, argumentative panel session here, you're probably not going to get it, because we all work together. We're all partners in the supply chain of the advertising ecosystem. Coming from a product perspective, that C word drives us all the time, the customer. And there's 2 types of customer always. One is we're Samsung Ads. So we have advertisers. Those are our customers. Okay, we're building products and solutions for our advertiser customers. Working with Yale at Publicis, he's working directly with brands and they are our customers. But on the other side, we have consumers, and a publisher only has an ads business if they can draw an audience based on the products and services that they produce, whether it's YouTube, whether it's ITV, whether it's Sky, whether it's Samsung TVs. We only have an ads business if we maintain the trust and transparency. And for me, a key word is simplicity for customers, the consumer one end and advertisers the other end. Perhaps my favorite quote from Steve Jobs, he often gets credited with this, but it tries to drive me and my team of product managers, is simplicity isn't simple. To try and break down the complexity of what's going on from consumer, the publisher end, to advertiser up here, and everyone in between, and try and break it down and simplify it for normal human beings is incredibly hard to do. And what I think we do is have a tendency to jump into the detail and talk about vast tags and VPay, and they are probably the right solution. But what do they actually mean in terms of advertiser customer and consumer customer? And I think that it can sound cliched and contrived, but I firmly believe that on a personal level and a professional level, we bring it back to our customers. And that's why going to the second word, collaboration, is so important. We have so many experts in the industry. We probably have the solution, right? And we need to find ways of simplifying those solutions and explaining those solutions. And I think we're doing it. I think the IAB is fantastic with its working groups. Emerging markets like CTV is growing and growing. It's the one to watch, but there's still a long way to go to simplify what's going on. And really, I look at Yale and go, what I'm trying to do day to day is hand up solutions that he understands and makes it easy for him to work with his advertisers, explain measurement, explain consent, and explain delivery at the end of the day and ROI. You know, that's the purpose here, I think. Easy to say that, but got to figure out how to do it now.
No.
But I think it's really, I think you hit a nail on the head there with regards to simplicity is key. Like, I think the overall objective is simple. Like, for example, talking on content level transparency is if we can get industry stakeholders and collaborate to deliver a simple solution, such as content level transparency, although the underpinning technology is complex. Some of the largest advertisers in the world all shift TV dollars to digital, which is really important, right? And that's a simple solution driving ROI. But I agree, the standards and the technology underpinning that is complex, and that's why collaboration is required, because it's not as simple as flicking a switch, unfortunately.
It's almost like we need product marketers for our standards, really. Like we often, like the advertisers, that's what they're doing for theirs, is like simplifying their message. We need to almost do that for our industry and our standards and technology within it. Yeah, something I've actually been thinking about for a long time is like how actually you see the rise in the role of like product marketing is becoming more and more important to be able to take the complex and make it just really simple and understandable. So,
the audience is agreeing with you in the chat.
And when you look at, you can put me back in my box in a minute, but when you look at GDPR, okay, and privacy law, I think there's a tendency to pile in on this is a legal problem, this is a legal solution, or technology, technical. But when you look at it, okay, from the David Burton view of the world, which may or may not be right, governments only pass legislation because it's what society is demanding them to do. Okay, they don't do it for fun, and society is made up of human beings, and our customers are human beings. So GDPR was only passed because there was a cultural shift in the UK and other countries in Europe, and you've got CCPA and other privacy laws globally, and what human beings, consumers, are saying to their governments, we don't understand, we want more transparency. And I would say this because I work in product, it therefore becomes a product issue, a customer issue. How do we simplify all the data that is being transferred? Data is probably the vaguest pronoun I work with. What type of data? An IP address is different from a mobile device ID, which is different from my sexual orientation and my religious beliefs, but it's all called data. And we're often talking data for a start. So what data is being used? An IP address, a device ID, and normally some sort of viewing behavior in the world of advertising. Next.
You have to humanize data.
Exactly that. And then it gets passed down the pipes, down the programmatic ecosystem or supply chain. But to where and for what purposes? And again, it's to remind ourselves that these are human-based, customer-based problems and understanding and simplicity issues. And I think we can do it, but sometimes I certainly have to do it, check myself to look at the problem through the right lens and not jump to the law, not jump to the technical solutions and think it's a human being. It's my mum, it's my wife, it's me sitting in front of my TV in the evening or hitting a website and a pop-up comes up.
One thing I always love about our industry is how everything always seems to come back to one issue. And I totally agree. I think like consumers, and so with this topic of like consumers needing to understand this simplicity, it's like also legislation is going to keep going in the direction that it is if we don't do a good enough job of communicating the value exchange of our industry to the consumer. We need to help make sure that we are that level of communication to the consumer is so important and something that we've probably not been doing as much of so far. But yeah,
one of the things that I want to touch on, it's fascinating to see what is the consumer need state, what is what do they desire, what does the regulator and our politicians think about it, and then also which is manipulation of certain types of things, because we have to take into account there's so much misinformation, disinformation out there. And what we've been uncovering, and you Tina, you started to talk about this in terms of like ethics and data sources. And what we've seen is we need to be really careful about what type of information we find on consumers and also the feedback that consumers are giving, because sometimes there's coordinated attacks on brands, there's coordinated attacks on certain ethnicities. And you see that type of misinformation, disinformation happening online. And so I think there's still a lot of presence and efforts around that through a lot of the industry groups to help us understand what is the true consumer message that they're trying to get around important topics around privacy or harmful content, around identity, consent. So there's a lot that we can learn, and there's a lot that we can actually swim through to find out the truth and the ethical way to do that. And that comes from a lot of the industry working together on self-regulation themselves. And how do we become more ethical about our own practices? How do we reinvestigate like our usage of different types of data? So from my perspective, we do an annual audit of a lot of our partners, of pretty much all of our technology partners, around how they use data, what it's used for, how it's being used for targeting, measurement. And we try to understand then, is this the right way that our advertisers would want to use this to reach their consumer? And I think that starts to hit on a lot of these things, is that we do a lot in terms of self-regulation, self-awareness in our industry, but we still have a lot of work and a lot of collaboration to do.
I couldn't agree more, and I'm actually just really conscious of time, but so I think I'll actually, on that very similar note, just do a quick like 20-second question to all of you. So I think like we all agree that a lot of the standards are out there. We need to self-regulate as an industry, and we need to communicate to the consumer. Maybe just like your quick view of like, how do we get there? If a lot of work has already gone into this and we're having these conversations, how do we get to the end point that we're talking about here? Yale or Jules, maybe, I don't know, maybe if we come to you first. Yale, you're talking about that point in yours, so maybe I'll come to you first.
Sure. My belief is focusing around this concept around brand integrity. If we're looking at the fundamentals of our brand's consumers, what they're trying to achieve, what they're expecting, what they're trusting of brands, there's this vacuum in the space where brands can fill in terms of what is their position, what is their purpose. And I feel like that can help us to achieve a lot of these things. But then we also, on top of that fundamentals, there's our work around ad fraud, safety, suitability, consent. But ultimately it leads to this notion of how do we become more cognizant of how culture meets our advertising standards through brand integrity.
Great. Dave, maybe you next, from kind of the other side of the supply chain. What's your thoughts? How do we get there?
I think it's to continue what we're doing. Organisations like the IAB Genuinely, you can't underestimate the importance of what you do and the working groups that you've been, and the last 3 days and this panel and all the discussions before. You can see there's a lot of people who want to share their expertise. And why are they doing that? So from my perspective, so we can serve Yale, the other agency groups and their customers. You hear him list the issues that he is trying to tackle for his customers. And I think the only way we do that is by continually coming together and sharing and simplifying as much as we can and keeping Yale and what Yale represents on this panel, those customers at the forefront of what we're doing. Genuinely believe that. So yeah, the 2 C words, customer first.
Keep Yale happy. Keep Yale happy.
New slogan of IAB.
Jules, I of course work with you very closely and know some of the views you may have, some of that. So maybe I'll go to you next.
Yeah, I think we've all said it to be short and sweet. Our success as an industry, addressing all the challenges that we face, is really predicated on adoption and participation right across the supply chain. If you look at tag standards, much of the success to date has been built on strategic partnerships that we've built with trade bodies. So as you mentioned, if you look at the brand safety certified standard, the launch of IAB UK's gold standard and its requirement for that within it had a significant impact on participation. When I talk to new businesses who are interested in joining the standards, often the reason they're coming to us is because they've been asked if they've got the standard by the agency, by the advertiser. So it's a mix of some companies do it because it's the right thing to do, because they want to show that their business is doing the right thing. And sometimes people come because they've been asked to do it. Either way, I don't mind. Come into the community, join the fold. So I think, yeah, it is collaboration, it's communication, it's education, and it's continually talking about it. And if we want to self-regulate as an industry, if we want to do what we know is right for our industry, rather than be told by others that perhaps don't fully understand our industry, then we need to do it together. So yeah, collaboration.
And David, maybe to just come to you.
I'll keep it quick. So trust and transparency are going to be even more key as we look to collaborate and grow industry partnerships as new standards get developed and adopted. And the ultimate goal is to create a stronger, safer and secure ecosystem for all.
Great. So very concise, and yeah, I think wraps up the session very nicely. I couldn't agree with all your points more, and I think, yeah, we keep going in the direction that we are. I think by having these discussions, we are already moving the industry so much closer to that. Thank you all for participating in the panel, and I'll pass back over to Constantine from IAB Europe. Thank you for having us, everyone.
Well, thank you so much, Tina, and a big thanks from me as well to Jules, to David, to Dave, to Yale. Very lively discussion, very insightful, and plenty of good quotes, I think. Collaboration, which is a synonym for IAB. Simplicity is not simple. Product marketers for standards was another brilliant one. So thank you, Tina, for that. And I'm not too sure about keep Yale happy, because I found it somewhat too personalized, even though he opted in as a clarion call or a rallying cry, but certainly lots of things to think about there. Thank you again, all of you.